Hi everybody, it's Dr. Domingo, and I thought I would make this quick video for you to give you some tips on this first paper that's coming up. First of all, I hope you're having a good week and that we have this good discussion around accounting fundamentals in our class. But in any case, we do have a paper that is due this Sunday, and so this video I made for you to give you some writing tips, some insights, and some things like what I look for in grading and such. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on it. What I'm going to do is I want to just give you a quick 2-minute review of our class so far. We've had 3 weeks of class. Then I'll delve specifically into our first paper, the financial issues paper, and then give you some writing tips. Some APA writing tips and just word choice in writing, because I think this is helpful for students that I've found in other classes. Okay, so financial management of nonprofit organizations. We've had 3 weeks of this class. In our first module, we started out by examining this idea of how nonprofits are like a business. And we had some really good discussion around nonprofits. And as you know, a nonprofit isn't restricted on making profit. It's just that profit, or anything that is made over and above their expenses, has to go back to the organization. And so the idea of a business and nonprofits, or a nonprofit business, it really is more similar than not. And I think part of this discussion is getting us to think about, hey, what are some operational and leadership issues that occur regardless of whether an organization is either for or nonprofit? Of course, the nonprofit organization has some specific nuances and specific regulations and laws, obviously, that impact its finances, but for the most part, it is run as a business, and having that mindset is helpful. Now, we went to Module 2 and we talked about those specific issues that impact nonprofit fiscal management. Things like accountability, governance, and other issues. Accountability being this idea of how do you ensure that there's trust and there's transparency, that the public is aware of what goes on in the nonprofit. Governance issues, we looked at the structure of the board, who gets to make the decisions. Is it a board that is readily available, or are they closed and they keep information from people? I think this whole idea of trust comes up in nonprofit fiscal management, and accountability, transparency, governance, those are huge things. But other issues that impact financial issues that impact the finances of nonprofits are things like policy changes, whether the laws allow donors to deduct from their taxes if they donate to a nonprofit, the economy, and just how government support of nonprofits. Some of you had discussed finances are an issue, and yes, finances are an issue, but what specifically about finances are an issue? Anyway, that was Module 2, and here in Module 3, we're talking about just some basic accounting fundamentals. And so over the next couple weeks, we are going to look at accounting specifically, and what are the financial statements that nonprofit leaders need to be aware of, and to know how to read. This week here we're talking about a thing called GAAP, the Generally Accepted Accounting Principle, and these are the rules of accounting, certain things that you have to do in terms of reporting, and what are those basic financial elements to think of. So we'll get into more detail of accounting next week, but these first 3 weeks are a great introduction to our first paper, which is again due Sunday. And so your first paper, on or before Sunday at 11:59 p.m., that's Pacific Standard Time. This paper specifically is what's known as an analysis paper. And remember what an analysis paper is. It is looking at the parts and then applying them to the context. The application of research and your support and statements have to be backed up by the literature, by the research literature. And by the literature, I don't mean, a magazine article, but research literature, okay? So I know sometimes students like to put a website, which is fine, but do include some of those peer-reviewed references. So it will take some time to do some research, but there's a lot out there. And so be sure to include that. Of course, APA, but you can write in first person. That doesn't apply here. This is a typo. You do want to write in third person. So I apologize that this got on the slide, but you can not write in first person. You must write in third person, okay? Third person. Now, let's get to the specific paper details. The paper is outlining two major issues. You can do three, you can do more than two, but at minimum two major issues that impact financial management of nonprofit organizations. What this means is that you have already started on some of this in your discussion. In fact, in our discussion in Module 2, we talked about some of those issues and you started a good conversation of this. Now, you can use those same two or use a different two, but I want you to go into more detail. So for example, let's say you chose the issue of sustainability. Well, I want you to go into detail and talk about what impacts sustainability. Why do we even have sustainability in the first place? Perhaps you want to select something like government-private partnerships. Well, yes, those impact, but how? How specifically? What are the main issues behind this? Some of you mentioned policy changes, which is a great issue that impacts some of the finances in nonprofits. But I want you to go into detail what specific policy changes. What exactly happens and to what extent does policy impact nonprofits? At what level? Who makes the decision? What are the mechanics behind it? So you see, I want you to go in depth. Another issue which is interesting, I know students in the past have covered this, is this issue of impact giving. Look that up, what that means. But impact giving, if you choose that as an issue, I want you to go into detail. What's the impact on donor expectations? Why do we have donor expectations? How do we get those expectations in the first place? So I don't want you just to mention the issue, but I want you to go in depth and look at all the angles. Look at the combination of these issues as well. I think that's a section in there. I want you to also include recommendations for action. So based on the literature, not just your opinion, or what you think it should say, but based on research and best practices, what is the course, or what are the courses of actions you need to take to address these issues? So again, I want you to go into a lot more detail and don't just highlight it at a cursory level, but go into detail, go into depth, go into lots of different perspectives and angles. Good APA is important. I mentioned support for your ideas throughout. Support from the research. This is not your opinion. This is, what does the research say? What does best practices say? What do peer-reviewed research says on financial issues? Formatting. Now, in this class, you want to make sure you have a cover page, you have an abstract, and a reference page. That's not counting the text. So when it says the paper is 6 to 8 pages, that is 6 to 8 pages of text. I don't count the cover page, I don't count the abstract nor the reference page in the page count. So I hope that helps. I want you to look at the rubric as well. That'll help you get some detail. One final thing is just how to format your paper. I think one easy way to format it is just take the sections of the rubric and use those as headers. So, section A, if you download the rubric, it's an in-depth examination. Well, maybe that's your first header, and then your subheaders are your two issues. Section B is your second header. So, use the rubric as your guide, okay? Now, some of you have asked, what do you look for in grading? And I wanted to give you a sense for how I grade, and hopefully you've gotten a quick sense of that as you've done your discussions. But the thing I mainly look for is content. So, do you have good stuff to write about? Is it answerable? Meaning, did you just answer the question? Not the question that you think so, but what did the question ask on the rubric? If it asks for an in-depth examination, did you do that? So it's helpful to download the rubric from the assignment link, and you can see the detail of what I look for. Now I also look for clarity, your expression, your flow, your transitions, how you write. Good scholarly writing isn't a lot of fancy words or long syllable words. Good scholarly writing is about clarity. Is it clear? Is it understandable? Then obviously conformity to APA. Beware of anthropomorphisms, which I'll explain what that is, but as I mentioned, include a cover page, abstract, and references. Now, there is a series on the CityU blog in terms of writing, and I always do this with all my classes. I just want to give a reminder that writing is important, and there are some resources for writing on the CityU blog, developing as scholars and writers. Part 1 is application, but there's a 4-part series. Take a look at that blog. Here's the link to it on this slide, but take a look because it's so informative. APA in the Chapter 3 in the APA manual, there is a section on writing clearly and concisely. So take a look at that. Now, writing the right way, these are just some phrases that I've seen a lot in student work. But here's a better way to say it. So when you say all 3 of the issues, or all 2 of the issues, it's just easier to say the 3. Or things like, these issues are fewer in number in nonprofits. You can just say fewer. Or these effects of these issues gives rise to. Well, instead of that word, gives rise to, you can just use the word cause. In all cases, just use always, and so on and so forth. One I see a lot is in order to mitigate the effects of these financial issues in nonprofits, just use the word to. So simplifying writing, cutting down words, makes it a lot more clear. Here's some other things. In spite of the fact that, just use although. In the event that, use if. These new innovations to financing nonprofits, well, just use innovations, because innovations are always new. Personal opinion, etc. So just take a look at this list and try to cut it down, be pointed, be more precise. Okay, finally, this thing on misrepresentation. I see this a lot with students who use a lot of research support, and all of you are doing great so far on that, so kudos to you. But one of the things that I see often is misrepresentation of research, saying that you summarized the research, but then you applied it to the point, but that's not what the research said. Here's an example. The room was painted blue because the sky is blue. And Domingo, 2017. Well, Domingo didn't actually say that. Domingo said that the sky is blue. He didn't say the room was painted because the sky is blue. He said that the sky is blue. So there's a small nuance there. The room was painted blue to look like the sky. So that's the actual context. So be sure to be exact in how you summarize it, and don't sort of be misleading. I know it happens unintentionally, but just try to be careful. Okay. The final thing is anthropomorphism, is attaching a human quality to a non-human thing. So the movie Paddington just came out. That's an anthropomorphism. It's assigning a human action to a non-human object. This often says, this article discussed. Well, an article is not human. The researcher is human. So you want to say the scholar discussed. Okay? So those are some things I hope that'll help for your paper. And again, I know you'll do well. You've been great so far in your discussion threads. Feel free to pause this video at times, rewind it, look at it again, because I'll do this sort of thing again for your next paper, but I thought this will be helpful for your first paper. And as always, don't hesitate to contact me with questions or concerns. Again, think you're going to do great. You've been doing great, and I will look forward to seeing you all online.